Alright everybody, welcome back. This time we're going to take a look at one of the new tools in Photoshop, CS2, which is the warp tool. And we're going to see how we can create a very popular effect that we created a lot of times in previous versions of Photoshop with some of the distort filters, and they weren't real reliable. So we're going to take a look at how we can do this in CS2 with warp. And it's a page curling type effect. So follow along. First thing to notice is that you look at my layers palette here. I've got a background layer, and then I've got a layer right on top of it, and it's just a photograph that I took the rectangular marquee tool. I drew a rectangular shape selection right behind that photograph, and I filled it with white, and then I just merged the two layers together so I have a nice white border around the photograph. Let's jump right into the warp function here. I'm going to choose Edit, Transform, Warp. And what I'll do is just start bringing in some of these corner points or some of the center points and just start dragging it around. And really, if this is the first time you've experimented with this tool, just play with it and see what it does. Click inside, click outside, click on these little control points, these handles right here, and see what they do. So I'm just going to start experimenting around with this. Click on one of the corner points, maybe up top here, and watch what this does. I'm going to drag it in. So it starts to show you the back of whatever you're dragging here. So I'm going to drag it in just to make it look like it's curling over a little bit, and we'll bring that up a little. Bring that up. That's looking pretty good here, and maybe I'll try to make it, that's a little bit too much right there. Okay, so that's looking about the effect that I want. So I'm going to press the Enter key. That's going to confirm my settings for this. Now the next step, I want to duplicate this layer because I want to create a drop shadow. So with the layer targeted, press Control or Command J. If you look in the Layers palette, I'll now have two versions of that same layer. I'm going to click on the bottom one to target it, and I'm going to do something here. It's a really cool trick. Press the D key. Now hold down the Alt or the Option key, then hold down the Shift key and press Backspace. If you look at my Layers palette, it filled all the pixels on that layer with black. So if I just held down the Alt or the Option key and the Backspace key, it would have filled the whole layer with black. But I threw the Shift key into the mix there, and by doing so, it just filled whatever pixels were on that layer with black. So that gives us our drop shadow to start with. And the way we're going to tweak the drop shadows, we're going to go into the Warp tool again. So I'm going to choose Filter, Transform, Warp, and now I'm just going to start bringing out my shadow a little bit. So trying to make it look even more as if it's raised up off of the paper. So I just bring out some of those corner points here. I don't want the shadow to show through here, so I'm going to duck that in behind here. I don't really want it to show too much through there. So that looks pretty good for what I want here. So I'll press the Enter key. And now I want to add a Gaussian blur to it. So I'm going to choose Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And I'm really just going to hit it with a real light blur, maybe 5 or 6 pixels. Let's drop that down a little bit and see how that looks. Yeah, it looks pretty good. And then I know I can always come in here and I can drop the opacity down just to not make it such a harsh blur, or not make it such a harsh drop shadow. So there I've got my page curled effect. The last step, if you want to take it one step further, create a new layer on top of all the other layers here. Select the brush tool, and let's zoom in on top of this curl. I'm going to select the brush tool. I'm going to tone it down a little bit, get my opacity up a little bit higher. I'm going to click once, and then I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and I'm going to click again, and that's going to draw a nice straight line. See how it drew a nice, almost a highlight right there for me? And I'll just drop the opacity of that down a little bit. I can even hit that with the same Gaussian blur that I used before, kind of spread it out a little bit. So that gives me a nice highlight right there. And then if you want to get super crazy, increase your brush size a bit. Change the foreground color to black and drop the opacity way down here. We don't want to have too much. Create one more new layer. This is going to be a shadow. And then just paint real light right inside there and right inside there. And just to give yourself a little bit of a shadow. And you can see I went outside the edges here. So just select the eraser tool again with a very soft edge brush. And just come in here and just erase some of those edges. Let's zoom out. That drop shadow is a little bit too in your face for me, so I'm going to tone it down just a little bit, but you can see where I'm going with it. So that's our page curl effect. Again, we use the warp tool in Photoshop CS2, and that's a new feature, and it really takes a lot of the guesswork out of doing this technique using any of the distort filters. So hope you enjoyed this tutorial. We'll see you again next time. Thanks.